All right, so I want to just kind of run through, zkSync, like as I mentioned, Optimism, Arbitrum, these ones have been around a little bit longer. zkSync started development, I would say, around the same period as they did. However, they have launched their mainnet about a year or so after these other optimistic rollups. But it's interesting to see that they are getting a lot of traction pretty quickly. So they launched their mainnet in March of last year. So they haven't even been up for a year now, but they pretty much, in terms of on-chain activity, have caught up to Arbitrum, Optimism, which I want to kind of get into here. So we're looking at 180-day fees here. As I mentioned, zkSync, they've raised $450 million, and that has allowed them to essentially bootstrap like this ecosystem and create a grants program and seed like a bunch of projects. So they already have like, and we'll get into some of the projects that are seeing the most usage later here, but there's quite a few projects already happening, which means there's users and there's revenues. So if we look at just the last 180 days, zkSync has done about $35 million in revenue. Of course, they are paying Ethereum and the Ethereum validators to anchor those proofs to the L1, and that has cost them $24 million. So that margin comes out to somewhere around 30%, which is pretty typical for the other L2s as well. So, and we'll get into some comps data later, but this is holding up pretty well against the other top L2s out there. So in terms of daily active users and monthly active users, like we're seeing some interesting stuff. I mean, they're doing over 400,000 or so on some days in terms of monthly active users, getting up over 3 million in some cases. So quite a bit of, on-chain activity for zkSync. In terms of like how you would compare that to like Ethereum, they're actually getting more active users than Ethereum already. So again, they just launched the mainnet 10 months or so ago. Again, early, very, very early. One thing that we are actually like parsing deeper into some of this data, and hopefully we'll have some more insights looking forward, is actually really getting into understanding the nature of these early users. Because what tends to happen with a new project is there's all these like potential token airdrops and incentives for users to interact. And I'm working with the token terminal team to just get a little deeper on this and understand, can we draw some correlations to like when a project announces an airdrop to how many users come into that project? And then are those users staying after the airdrop hits? Because that indicates more like product market fit versus just these like mercenary users.
And just quickly there, Michael, I think what would be interesting now, especially given the anomaly of zkSync being so popular with its daily usage, is what is zkSync actually being used for? Is it being used for sending things of value? Or is it being used for, let's say, exchange trading for tokens? Or is it being used because there have been some dApps, decentralized applications built using zkSync, and one or two are like that ChatGPT kind of application for zkSync ecosystem that everybody is using it? Or is it a game or whatever it is? So it'll be great to drill down further, if not in this episode, but in future episodes, on what dApps are being used on zkSync that is driving all those activity, which is phenomenal.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you asked the question too. So I'm going to get into, we have a pretty good breakdown of like which projects are seeing the most users, the most transactions, the most gas usage. So I'm going to get to this in a little bit. But yeah, let's move on to just transaction counts. So again, just looking at total transactions that are being executed on zkSync. For reference, Ethereum's doing around 1 million per day. So you're seeing zkSync getting up past Ethereum. Pretty interesting, right? So it tells me that like the L2 ecosystem is thriving, it's healthy, growing, and this is what we expected to see. This is basically what the Ethereum's roadmap, has been for a while, that it's going to scale in this modular format. And, this is confirming sort of that roadmap. So interesting to see this.
Just on that graph, I do want to make a quick point over here, especially for all our viewers who are new to crypto. This is the data that you use to evaluate the fundamental value of a network. Just like with Visa, just like with MasterCard, just like with Discovery Network, just like with any payments network that includes transactions, you look at how many transactions are happening. So for all those people who still think crypto is vaporware, this is actual data, thanks to Token Terminal, that we are able to evaluate for even layer 2 protocols like zkSync, that this is an incredible amount of transactions happening. like millions of transactions, right, Michael? This is the value, right? This is the fundamental value of this network. I believe zkSync doesn't have a token at the moment, but in future it would have a token. But that's besides the point. The point is that this technology network has got value, and that's why we're seeing so many transactions there.
Yeah, well said. Just moving on here, again, when you're looking at a lot of the fundamental data, when you're a layer 1 blockchain or a layer 2 blockchain, looking at the developer activity is obviously critical. And we're seeing like a nice increase on, so if you even just look going back just to like mid to late last year, the developer activity is picking up quite a bit on zkSync. So that's another like very bullish trend, because what that means is like they've sort of like bootstrapped the thing and with like a smaller set of developers, and now that has incentivized more developers to come in, and it's a sign that like, okay, there's people here, they're building things. This is a data point that like we're trying to actually go much deeper on this as well and say like, okay, it's great that we have some data, this is coming from GitHub repositories, but like, can we go even deeper and identify projects where there are developers that we can just tell that they're 10x developers versus like the average developer? Because just a code commit from one developer to another, there can be massive differences, just like there is in anything else. And so we're going to be, digging deeper on this. But right now we can just see that, okay, there's just more activity. This is a positive sign. More developers, typically a leading indicator of more useful applications, which then means there's more users, which is that flywheel to more transactions, which we just showed, and more economic value, more utility of the actual blockchain. So nice to see developer activity growing as well. And I mentioned earlier, like one thing we tend to see with new projects, new layer 2s is like this, the users will sort of circle around and look for airdrops, right? They're going to come interact, they're going to use their wallet and interact with smart contracts to sort of signal to the team that, hey, I'm a user, I'm loyal, send me your airdrop when you release it. This is a fabulous new feature. It's been around for a little while on Token Terminal, but this is a cohort analysis that's giving us a glimpse into this, and we're going to go deeper on this as well. But what it's showing us is like, okay, when a user came on, so in February of 2023, we had 281,000 new users. So these are new wallets that started interacting with smart contracts in zkSync. And if we start to look out, so after a month, so the next month, which means into March of last year, 72% of those came back, right? So that's kind of it. So we're starting to get a feel for, do we have mercenary users, right? Are they coming for something and then leaving and never coming back? This is showing us is that this is actually very, very strong. So, if you go out all the way out to 10 months, you still had 30% of those users interacting with the smart contracts. And you can see, like, for the most part, this is green. We've looked at a number of L2s to compare and see if there's something interesting going on here where there's some stickiness with the user on zkSync. And from what we can see is like there appears to be. So I'm just going to share, this is Arbitrum, right? So Arbitrum is very different looking, right? So this is the same exact time period. So Arbitrum had 1.2 million come in February of last year. But if you go out to month 10th, only 2% actually returned, and we're still using smart contracts. So it's interesting. I mean, we're looked at a number of other L2s, and zkSync is far and away the stickiest we've observed. We still need to go deeper on the data to like understand why that's the case. But this is a really awesome feature on Token Terminal.
Look, I have to say applause to Token Terminal and applause for you as well, Michael. I mean, this is the reason we started the rundown, right? We didn't start the rundown to open up price charts and draw triangles or draw dinosaur patterns there and tell people that Ethereum is going to go to the moon. There was a reason we claimed that rundown is going to be world's first crypto fundamentals educational podcast, and we had Token Terminal as a partner. And I want to applaud both of you for sharing such great insights and creating the technology where, we can clearly see at a click of a button the difference between different protocols out there, what value they derive, and what is the difference between their fundamental indicators. And then, as a rational investment professional or as a rational investor of different asset classes, can evaluate these crypto assets, whether they make sense at a particular price or not. Just like how you did with Marinate Finance and Jito. There's something similar over here. So, great feature by Token Terminal. and great analysis by you, Michael.
Yeah, thanks. So you had asked an awesome question, Shiv, like what types of projects are people actually using on zkSync? And what we've got here is, this is data that's extracted from Token Terminal using their trending contracts feature, which allows us to observe which contracts, which are essentially, SyncSwap is a contract on zkSync, which contracts are users interacting with the most. And what we're looking at is the last 180 days. And we can see that SyncSwap, so this is a DEX, is the number one project with 18.9 million transactions through this DEX, which is quite a bit. Like in terms of having a relative comparison here, Uniswap did about 4 million transactions on Ethereum over the same time period. That's pretty interesting. So then the way I'm thinking about it is like, well, okay, that's interesting. We know most of the activity on Uniswap is on Ethereum itself. Transactions on the layer one are more expensive. And so those users are probably trading larger volumes because they're paying higher fees to do so. So one thing we're going to be looking at here is like, what is the average wallet balance for somebody trading on Uniswap on Ethereum L1 versus SyncSwap? Is it just a different type of user? And like, what can we start to learn from that? So transitioning, and then the number two project is Circle. The Circle has 18.8 million transactions. This is a USDC stablecoin transactions on zkSync. And, again, comparing that to like what we see on Ethereum, the transactions are much higher here on zkSync versus USDC on Ethereum. And then we also looked at it from comparing to Arbitrum and optimistic rollups, and again, much higher. So digging into this a little bit, but interesting to see that it's being used for stablecoins, being used for DEXs. Almost all of these other projects are primarily DeFi oriented projects, which kind of makes sense. DeFi is typically the first thing that gets built on a new ecosystem. You kind of need to build that like financial infrastructure first, and then you get the other stuff. But that's kind of the takeaways in terms of like the number of transactions. We've looked at this for active users as well, and like the data sort of looks the same, right? The top two are Circle and SyncSwap. Once again, even for active users, Circle has 2.8 million active users over a 180-day period. SyncSwap has 2.56. So, pretty good numbers here. And then in terms of gas fees, always going to see the DEXs be up there on the gas fees because the computation required to do a DEX swap is just more intensive than a simple, stablecoin transfer. So this gives you a little bit deeper on like, how is this ecosystem being used? And what are these like initial sort of projects that are being built on the L2?
Yeah. So look, just quickly, Michael, would it be fair to say that since what you have told us in your comparative analysis of zkSync versus other rollups is that there is clearly a preference among users then, right? Who are exposed to zkSync, that they would rather prefer to use zkSync to interact with these smart contracts, such as they would rather use SyncSwap rather than using Uniswap if they are exposed to zkSync ecosystem. And that would then allude that these users value privacy because any smart contract transactions that they are doing, let's say on SyncSwap, is private. You can't really identify or nail down a user like you would with Uniswap. You can't really do that if somebody is interacting with these smart contracts on the zkSync ecosystem. Would it be a fair assumption or conclusion to make?
Could be. So right now, the experience would be the same. So if you're doing that, the privacy on the L2, and this is on zkSync's roadmap, they're going to make these transactions private, but they're focused on scaling currently. So if you went to a SyncSwap transfer and went to a zkSync block explorer and observed it, you would see similar transparency that you would see on like an Ethereum block explorer. The privacy is when the data is anchored to Ethereum. So if you looked at the transaction, the proof of the transaction that went to Ethereum, you wouldn't be able to see all those details. Somewhat irrelevant just because you can still see them if you went to the L2 block explorer to see the execution of it. And that's one of the questions of like, what are the key differences between these optimistic rollups, these zero knowledge rollups, and then how does that start to point towards use cases? Will we start to get consensus amongst developers around like which style fits certain use cases? I would say that like this isn't very clear right now. And especially when you look at the types of projects being built on these, they all looked at, like if we looked at Optimism or Arbitrum and looked at the types of projects, we wouldn't see clear consensus. Like you'd see DeFi as probably the number one on those as well. As these ecosystems mature, to see like what are developers identifying as our game's going to be built on zero knowledge rollups, and that just doesn't make sense for optimistic rollups, for example. I think we'll start to get clarity on that as things mature. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at right now.
Can I quickly ask you another question then, Michael? And this is me, the curious host, as you know, always asking questions. According to you, why zkSync is so popular among users in that case? Since it's more expensive than the optimistic rollups, why do you think zkSync is more popular among the users then?
So one of the important things with any blockchain or L2 is how much money did these teams raise? And then how did they use that money to incentivize developers to come in? So there is a $200 million grant proposal from BitDAO, which basically is seeding a lot of these teams, I believe. So you had all of these projects that were actually being built on zkSync before their mainnet went live. So this is very strategic. They raised a ton of money, built all this while they were building the blockchain. They had projects already building with them. And then when they launched the mainnet, they've already got almost like this distribution mechanism. They've got, lots of users, developers, and it's easier to bootstrap it. From there, it's just, is this real, right? Are they coming over for airdrops? That's essentially the work that I'm doing now, is to determine, are these mercenary users or are they going to stay? And then what are the interesting use cases that we can clearly see differentiated? I don't have the perfect answer to that just yet, but we can certainly see that there's a good amount of activity happening so far.
And we thank you and Token Terminal for that. So this was great.
Yeah, just to close it up, I want to just share some comps data. So let me pull that up. Just closing out here with some comps data. As I mentioned, we talked a lot about the optimistic rollups in the prior L2 economics of Ethereum L2's episode. People can check out. So how does zkSync, right? They launched the mainnet, after these projects. Sorry, Base actually launched after zkSync. So that's the newest one. But Arbitrum and Optimism were around before zkSync. How are they stacking up just in terms of the last 6 months? You can see zkSync is number one in terms of revenues. In terms of the gross margin, they're number two today, pretty close, across the board. In terms of average daily active users, they're number one with a pretty nice lead there, which is pretty interesting. 9-month user retention, we showed, those user retention rates just blowing out these other projects out of the water on this user retention. So we're going to continue to monitor that. In terms of the number of transactions over the last 180 days is average per day. zkSync is almost at 1 million per day. So again, number one against other optimistic rollup competitors. In terms of value locked, this is where they're a little bit behind. So number 4 in terms of total value locked. For developers, number 1, we showed the growth in developer community. Transactions per second, they're also number 1 in this category. Total transactions, 160 million, number 1. And the average costs, they're all kind of close here. And this is going to be updated. The Ethereum network has an upgrade coming called EIP 4844, and this number should come down significantly once that's implemented. But yeah, pretty interesting to see them pretty much leading in most of the important categories compared to these other L2s. So something we'll continue to monitor. But yeah, that's zkSync for now.
Look, I'm just amazed at that 9-month user retention figure. If we bring a Web2 product manager, if we bring Google, Meta, Amazon, any of their product managers, and they see that statistic, that the user retention is 53%, their mind would be blown away. So yeah, look, I would love to continue monitoring zkSync. I just find this statistics, especially since I'm viewing this for the first time. You have analyzed this, so you've studied this for at least a few weeks now. I'm seeing this for the first time. I just find this comparative analysis bizarre. Firstly, because of the 9-month user retention being so high. Then secondly, so many daily active users compared to its other peers, yet its total value locked is so less. So that clearly suggests that in certain ways they're doing something right. That's why they've got an incredible user retention. However, the users do not have that much of value within their wallets. That's why the total value locked is actually very less compared to its other competitors. So interesting group of users zkSync have. And it will be great to see this comparative analysis change month after month.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see if this number does come up. And this is sort of what we're digging more into. So we're looking at the specific wallets and trying to determine what you just said. Like, are these just sort of people that are coming over with very little value in the wallets that are just sort of interacting with the smart contracts because they want to pick up some airdrops moving forward, or there's token incentives for liquidity mining or whatever for some of these projects? And are people going to start to get more comfortable moving larger amounts of value? Because when you're, interacting on a newer blockchain, there's always like a little bit of risk moving your assets over. So yeah, good insight from you, just seeing that difference. And then, yeah, the 9-month, the user retention rates are certainly much higher than their competition. So yeah, more to come on this, but interesting project. This is something we're looking, going to continue to monitor for 2024. Starknet is another zero knowledge rollup that we're looking at as well. It doesn't have a token just yet, but we think they're going to be part of this conversation as well.
Amazing. I think this was a great episode, Michael. I think people, when they're going to watch this episode, and I also want all the DeFi Report Substack users to subscribe on the DeFi Report YouTube channel so that they can visually see all the hard work that Token Terminal, Michael and I, and our team, Gian, led by Gian, are doing. So subscribe on DeFi Report YouTube channel and see what all visuals are coming over here your way rather than just listening on the audio, because this is some great analysis. And this is exactly why we started the rundown, isn't it?
100%.
That we create this framework for investment professionals rather than drawing lines on a chart and telling when it's going to go to the moon. So great insights. We're going to track this. And I think that today what we did with zkSync is something that we should continue doing with other projects so that people get enlightened about these other projects as well. Next week, we're going to talk about the result and whatever the result is going to be for the ARK Bitcoin Spot ETF and whatever that repercussions would be. And we're going to dig a little bit deep on CME contracts versus other crypto derivative contracts that are available on native crypto exchanges as well, and our educational series that we're doing anyway. Anything for you, last words for you, Michael, before I say goodbye to all our listeners and viewers?
No, I think just we've been getting a lot of good feedback. We've even had some people reach out and say, hey, we'd love to see you guys cover this project or that project. So keep those suggestions coming. We're going to keep doing the analysis, and we're always looking for new ideas. Hopefully we'll have some guests coming as well this year. But yeah, just excited to continue to do this on a weekly basis with you.
Amazing, Michael. And on that note, guys, please, like Michael said, comment, let us know what you like, what you don't like, and we'll continue to be on this self-improvement journey. We're doing this because we're going to enter a bull cycle, and a lot of, charlatans are going to come and tell you what is the next big thing, which is not going to be the next big thing, and you're going to lose money on that. We don't want that to happen to you all. So let us know what you like, what you don't like. We're going to keep on improving. And if you do like it, please share it with your mom and dad, so they also get to know what really crypto is about rather than what they think or what they hear on various traditional financial news channels. And with that, Michael, thanks a lot for another great analysis on this episode of The Rundown. And thank you all for tuning in. See you next week.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.